which has been led by Jessie Pham, who's a principal with Delta Partners. Over to you, Jessie.
Thanks, James. Good afternoon, everyone. And thank you for joining us right after lunch. So panelists, you have a big job ahead of you to make sure everyone's awake. So I hope there's a bit of debate, maybe a little friction, no water throwing, but we'll keep it friendly and intellectually stimulating. So with us today, we have Jeff Robater, from 1111 Systems. We have here Robert Walters, VP of Connections. I'm sorry, Jeff, CRO of 1111 Systems. And we have here Robert Walters, VP of Global Connections of AT&T. We have here Cassandra Schenkel, the Senior Director of Commercial Strategy for C&W Business. Ricky Chow, the Chief Strategy and Customer Officer of CBC Tech, and Paul Stanley, VP Sourcing for EMEA for Orange Business. So before I start questioning you all, we'd love to have around the room, if you would talk about your role and how the dynamics of buyers and sellers are changing your strategic decision making and how you run your business to meet those buyers' needs. Yeah.
Great. Thank you very much. So from an 1111 perspective, we are a global managed infrastructure company. We work with the best services and solutions that are out there, bring it together around three pillars of cloud, connectivity, and security. So from our perspective, it's really understanding what the outcomes. So we start with the outcomes, seeing where the customers are, what are the applications they're looking to run, how do they want to run, where does it need to live? Right? And then we work to drive everything with them from there. We're seeing big changes in how they procure when it comes to the number of vendors that they work with, right? They're looking for more of the one throat to choke. They're looking for more vendors working together. We're hearing that a lot. And really looking at how they can focus on their business and get trusted advisors, trusted partners to provide the solutions.
All right, so you've definitely prefaced some of the questions that I was going to ask you about later, but that's amazing. I know that, you know, in the trend in the market, application-led conversation is kind of changing. Before, network procurement was much more with your procurement leaders, but now that conversation is really taking up in the CXO level. You have to be solution-oriented, so we'd love to dive into that a little bit later. But Robert.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Robert Walters, AT&T, Global Telecommunication Service Provider. At our core, connecting businesses and consumers all around the world. In terms of how the dynamics, so what I do for a living, by the way, I'm 100 days into it. Before that, I've been building networks in the US for the last 5 years, which we've been doing frantically to increase our reach, increase our reliability, and obviously enhance our capabilities in our network. So now I have the great responsibility to procure third-party services on behalf of our wholesale and retail team, and to make sure that we can serve customers, as Jeff mentioned, as a one-stop shop, and do so as a dependable, reasonable cost provider. So that dynamic for me is we want to find strong alliances, not just suppliers, that can provide a extensive network reach, and do that at a cost of doing business. We used to call it ease of doing business, but I'll call it cost of doing business that allows us to price ourselves in alignment with the customers.
All right, thanks, Robert. And over to you, Cassandra.
Yes, hi, Cassandra Schenkel with Liberty Networks. We rebranded this morning. And the dynamics for us are a little different. We have two kind of sides of the business on Liberty Networks, which is part of Liberty Latin America, but specifically we service carriers and hyperscalers on the infrastructure side through wholesale. And then we also have a B2B business serving businesses throughout the LATAM region. And I think on the carrier side, what we're seeing is a higher demand for automation, especially on the pricing side, and more visibility and transparency on the delivery side. And then on the side for B2B, I think they're really looking for a consultative approach and understanding their full business and creating an end-to-end solution. So connectivity at the core, and then the things that we layer on top, whether it's through in-house or through third party, to create those solutions for them.
Thanks, Cassandra. Over to you, Ricky.
Hi, everyone. I'm Ricky Chow. I'm actually based in Hong Kong. So CBC Tech is a network as a service provider. We enable cloud-native network and security as a service for enterprise to deliver the application performance. Going to the buy and sell relationship, we actually look at from a little bit different perspective. We look at that from a customer journey perspective is when a customer come to us to learn about our product, the buying process, how we deliver it to them, how they use the product, how they pay for that. So, and we tend to look at in every journey, how do we do a better job on that, right? So the way we do that is, every 6 months, we run a CSAT survey, we run an NPS survey, try to understand the dynamic in each stage and how customer, interact with us. As you know, in our business, we are not selling to one person. We are selling to a group of people or a group of people that from a customer side actually interact with us. So we want to make sure that we deliver good service from different stages. So that's one piece. The other piece is we also start doing transaction survey. So when we deliver a service, when we close a Ford ticket, we want to know how the customer will react to that. Do we do a good job for that? Do we make it easier for a customer to use our service? So through those mechanisms and really use the data and the feedback, help us to improve that the customer journey.
Thanks, Ricky. And over to you, Paul.
So last one. So hello, everyone. I'm Paul Stanley, head of sourcing for Europe, Middle East, Africa, Russia in Orange Business. And we cover over 180 countries, 27 affiliates. You probably know us for the mobile brand more than the enterprise. We say a native network digital company. From a buyer's perspective, we've got a team of over 70 buyers, of which we serve 130 countries in my specific region. And we buy everything from local commodities, SIM cards, network, SASE, security, and cloud. So.
Thank you. And so I think from everyone's responses, there are a few themes that are happening in the industry right now. We have softwareization, virtualization, which allows for a bit of that infrastructure agnostic and the ability to have as a service, right? That leads us to the automation of network, looking at bandwidth on demand or network on demand, and how that's changing the dynamics between buying and selling, right? And then the last part was what Jeff had initially mentioned, that application-led, right? Now that cloudification is really taking over most of the enterprises, and you have hyperscalers having different conversations with enterprises about their needs and their solution as a holistic IT network package. That affects, when we look at networking, how that affects networking in terms of procurement. So with that, I'd like to pass it on to you, Cassandra, as a service business model is becoming the norm in the software space. And what are enterprise looking when they're looking for buying in this new way? What are their priorities, and how has the telco space responded to those demands?
Thank you. I think as a service model, we all know it as software as a service. That's been around for a while, but it's been around for a while for us as well, and infrastructure as a service or platform as a service. I think on the buyer side, it enables them or facilitates easier sourcing and management of their infrastructure. On the provider side, it allows us to centralize some of the back office functions, some of the operations, but it also provides scale, and therefore we can pass down the value and the efficiencies down to the customer. At the end of the day, I think we have to think about consumers or buyers want to consume technology. They don't necessarily want to own and manage it and deal with obsolete assets on their books and so forth. And for us, it just allows us to serve a broader audience and ensure that we have the latest technologies for the customers in this model.
And Ricky, from your perspective, you've mentioned CBC Tech is along the same line as a service. So how are you seeing the dynamics and trends over in Asia?
Yeah, I think what we're seeing is enterprise are transforming from a legacy network security infrastructure to a SASE architecture, right? So if you go to enterprise today, I mean, they still own router, switch, firewall on-prem, right? And when we look at next generation, they say, well, why should we own this? Right? We want to turn everything into OpEx model. We want to buy everything as a service. And we want you guys to integrate not just the networking piece, but we also want you to integrate the security piece and enable them to connect to clouds and software as a service. So, and I think that create a new dynamic or demand for us. And I think one of the value prop for us is how do we put this together and how do we offer them as a service seamlessly to meet the experience.
And I'm going to ask a difficult question is, what's the take-up in the market? I know, we say as a service and we say network on demand and we say network as a service all around VNFs and whatnot. Very sexy sometimes. But what are you seeing in the market?
Quite frankly, if you look at enterprise specifically, they want bandwidth on demand for certain route, right? Because one, they want more predictable spending model, right? So on the other hand, in just like if you connect to offices around the world, well, technically you can't scale that way because we don't own the last mile, right? So I think we do see the demand, especially between like data center, but not largely across enterprise WAN. That's what we see.
I think also there's a trade-off of CapEx to OpEx, right? And going from on-prem to more off-prem or as a service, I think some of the challenges are kind of, these licensing fees. I do think the take-up is increasing, and you see it happening pretty rapidly. I think one of the things when you don't have necessarily on-prem, you also don't need the people and the know-how and the expertise. That can be more centralized to the provider. I think there's an advantage on that side, but I do see a big step up, and I think that is the way forward. But you do obviously still have people that need to get out of kind of this on-prem fixed solution and make that transition. And some of the stuff is not obsolete yet, so it'll take some time to transition over.
Thank you. I think, Jeff, you have a comment?
Yeah, I was just saying, I think it allows customers' business to be flexible towards where they're heading, right? And I think that's a big part. When you're investing historically in a big infrastructure on-prem, you knew that you were going to be there for many years, right? And I think today, the technology is changing and evolving so quickly. If you're investing with partners that are in a as a service model, you can continue to evolve, and your business can pivot as it needs to meet your current demands, your current needs, without having to be caught in a big capital expense.
So with that, I want to flip it a little bit and get to you, Robert, on the buyer side. So we noted, enterprise is picking it up, but one use case that we've heard that on demand is definitely has better traction is in the wholesale world, right? From your side, AT&T actually had partnered up with ServiceNow to create an inventory program that can be used industry-wide and whatnot. And I think this begs the question of how automation and on-demand plays a role in the carrier-to-carrier relationship.
Yeah, first speaking of the ServiceNow relationship that we announced, I think earlier this year, it's specifically around the telco network inventory, which those of us that have built networks or supported customers in this industry for a long time know that data is rich and complex. So if there's people, there's processes, and there's platforms, and in order to get all three aligned, you have to have that data layer kind of mastered, and that's ongoing challenge, I believe, for all of us. And how we curate that data and how we exchange that data in the industry, the more standardization in terms of whether it's through APIs or what platforms we use, is going to drive down the cost of the industry, in my very passionate opinion. And this is something we're hoping that will be adopted, but we've just started the journey with ServiceNow, and they're a strong supporter from us on the process and people side also. So this is more of a back office ticketing, repair, you know, sending out our field forces approach and how we can optimize that. But we think it has higher upside, and that at some point you can integrate this from an API perspective with your customer interactions on the wholesale and even retail side.
Right, definitely. And so we talked about the, I'm going to call you guys challengers here, but more of the new age telco business model as a service. And over to you, Paul. You know, you've been around telco for a while through several vertically integrated players. What are customers looking for in a vertically integrated player that you think continues to be true, and how are you, meeting the challenge of the challengers?
Sure. Well, to be called a challenger from Orange is a nice. I'll take that as a compliment. I'm not sure I've been called that, but firstly, the on-demand thing I've heard a few times, and from a buyer's perspective, I'm not convinced we've got the user case correct. I think as an on-demand, what people actually expect is they want to pay for what they consume, and that's slightly different to what on-demand is. So from a telco, they think, well, I can make a bit more money out of this because margins are being pushed, and I want to pay for the bandwidth over what you're going to consume. For the consumer, whether that's an enterprise or an actual consumer, they're thinking, well, I've bought 100 gig and I only use that 20% of the time. I actually want to pay for the other 80% much lower. So I just think at the moment the world is kind of working itself out of what is actually bandwidth on demand. Certainly from a buyer's perspective, it is certainly a consume what you pay for what you consume, right? Which is a slightly different style. In terms of what we see from the enterprise model, simplicity is one, automation is another, and they're actually driven by the SASE models and the security plays and the cloud plays, and the only reason they're driven by that is because it's so fragmented on the partner software side. You get so many companies that become a Fortune 500 in 5 years. They can go from a 40,000 euro company to a 5 billion euro company in 4 years. That it's really, really fragmented. And the telco part is the only part that's static. You can move fiber around so much, but there's a degree that you can move that around, right? So that's kind of being exploited where you push the other side. So the simplification and the automation is absolutely key for what we do go forward. Digitalization on the automation side as well. But by that, we must come to the forefront with far more simple cost models for our consumers to take. At the moment, they're very, very complex for us to sell, and there's no need. We have to take some risk. I remember being back in 2002, I was in a Malaysia conference, and Facebook at the time were just starting off, and they said the problem with a telco provider is that for every bit of bandwidth, you want $1. You want a bandwidth, you want $1. And I don't think that changed. 21 years, if someone buys a 2 meg or a 10 meg or 100 meg, we still want $1 for it, and that's probably got to change, and we're probably at that melting pot stage now where I think we're getting there to a subscription type of model or a bandwidth on demand kind of model, dare I say.
I hear you. I mean, I still think the average in the market is still 1 to 3 year contracts. So I think the buyers are saying one thing, and we're slowly letting it go, right? But I wanted to shift gear a little bit. And Cassandra, you mentioned something earlier where consumer wants to consume data instead of managing, right? So I wanna ask Jeff here, with your technology stack that 1111 provides, right? You've also just acquired SunGuard. You're going from cloud to managed services. how do you manage the relationship between your partners to deliver the right customer service, the right managed services for your customers?
Yeah, so I think from our perspective, it starts with what are the outcomes that the customer is looking for, right? If you start with the outcome, if you understand what their objectives are, then we can back into what are the services that they need, and then what are the right solutions and products to get there. And that's where a lot too, within, when you talk about this room, you know, a lot of the partners that we have, and like Robert mentioned, right, it's about how can we work more closely with our vendors? How do we work more closely to provide the better service? And at the end of the day, if you're starting with the outcome in mind and not a product, it allows you to really get the right solution, which is not about price, it's about getting what the customer needs and what does that uptime look like? How does it look from a reliability perspective? How do they access their data? How do they get across? And really, how do those vendors work together to create a seamless process for the customer?
All right, and Cassandra, over to you. How do you manage that relationship, right, to get the right outcome for the customers?
In terms of which partners we
Yeah,
we choose?
for the partnerships, and you know, from managing your buyer's expectation and being a buyer yourself, how do you manage that ecosystem?
So yeah, we use partners in all different layers, right? Whether it's to extend our reach, if it's an area that we don't cover, to support our customer, or if it's applications that are layered on top of the infrastructure that we own. I think a big thing is having common SLAs, right? So, like he said, Jeff, that first it's understanding what the customer needs are, evaluating our product portfolio, creating the solutions that they need, right? It's not just a list of products, but then working with the right partners and giving them the same standards we set for ourselves, whether it's the right SLAs or, you know, availability, transparency. So I think that's a big component, and we do just have a very few, like a pretty small list of partners that we work with to create our B2B solutions as well as our network solutions.
You know, I'll pass that question over to you, Ricky. I'm sorry, Jeff.
No, I was just going to echo on that. I think transparency is really important, right?
Yeah.
I think customers, there used to be, if you go back 10, 15 years, I feel like there was a curtain behind how you were delivering some of the services, who the providers were that you were using. To me, I think the transparency is very valuable, right? It's okay to talk about who you're working with because you can be better together in that scenario.
Yeah, and most of the time we're usually in the room with our partners, with the customer together, right? Creating that solution in one room. It's not us reselling.
And Ricky?
Yeah, I think we have two type partner. You know, the first type partner really enable us to expand the footprint. I would say this piece probably easier because this is you know, folks from the same industry, and I think for you know the year operation we know them well. The second piece is the tech partner, because when we look at this SASE architecture, we have the network piece. We don't have the security piece, so we got to build the ecosystem to you know, have that security provider on our platform, right? Now, I think managing the relationship is probably not the most challenging, but how do we transform the team from sales to pre-sale to post-sale to really understand, you know, security as a service, which is honestly, to some extent, is beyond our domain knowledge, coming from a telco background.
All right. And I'm going to take this moment before we continue with the panelists. Is if you have any questions out there, James will be going around with the microphone, so to tee up the questions. I can't see you, James, but I assume you heard me. Okay, perfect. And then, Robert, I wanted to shift gear one more time to you with the latest partnership from AT&T with BlackRock for Gigapower, and really understand that dynamic there that you know is creating this push for potentially open access with Gigapower, and what that speaks to in terms of the demands in the U.S. market.
Yeah, I think in the beginning when I was introducing myself, I was talking about AT&T's desire to connect more businesses, more households. And we've talked about the capital intensity in this industry quite a bit already, and just 20, 30 minutes here today. So, I mean, we basically have a three-prong approach inside of AT&T in terms of our build. The traditional kind of in-footprint approach. Secondarily, now you guys are aware there's a lot of public sector money being pumped into kind of digital divide and ensuring that we extend the reach of broadband from a capability perspective. And then third, we have some out of franchise or out of footprint, as we used to call it, builds that we've done historically, but from a capital intensity, one way to accelerate those builds is through what you called a partnership or what we would call a joint venture with BlackRock.
Yeah.
And yes, there's an open access element to it, and they're a separate entity from an accounting structure perspective, but we're really excited about that joint venture partnership and offering that extended capability to others, right? And extending our reach. They've put together an extremely talented leadership team, some of which are former AT&T, so I have no doubt in terms on the execution arm that they'll get that complete, and they've committed to, I think, 1.5 million locations publicly, and I expect that to go up, and hopefully you'll run into some of those folks and people in the industry can get to know a little bit more about it directly, but it's just an alternative business venture, just to continue to do what we do for a living, which is connect people throughout the world.
And definitely, if you were all here in the previous panel, I think Eric Thompson from Zayo said it correctly, like on the nose, is if we were to spend all the capital to connect everyone, I think we'll run out of capital. So partnership is the way to go to make sure we have complementary access and complementary services to provide for what buyers really want, right? You know, you mentioned the three-pronged strategy. Orange this year have released a whole new set of strategy, and can you speak a bit about specifically the security part? And you know, a bunch of analysts always say, you know, SASE is the way to go. Security, SD-WAN is a combination that cannot be untangled, and cybersecurity is become a really big concern. Priority, especially after COVID. So can you speak more to how security is impacting the customer decisions?
Yeah, absolutely. So you said Orange as well, which is a rarity. So we are Orange. And the customer is putting the security first now, and then the network second. Before, it was always the network first and the security second. With the increase of internet-based networks, SD-WAN networks, that security is becoming incredibly, incredibly important. And the one thing that you don't know about security is until you've been hit by a security storm. So you always think you've got the best security out there, and then you'll lose millions of dollars because you got it wrong. And for a buyer, that is incredibly fearful and an incredibly powerful point for us to get right. And I don't think we've managed it yet, because there are still customers being targeted with DDoS attacks. But we are getting there, and there's new suppliers and new partners being onboarded as we come along. As we speak, there are new partners out. From the Orange specific part, as I said, we had 27 affiliates. Most are country specific. One of them is Orange Cyber Defense. So we've separated out our own cyber security, our own cyber defense company. It was $1 billion company overnight. Within 3 years, they aim to be a $3 billion company. They have 800 people, and they will be acquiring many more companies in the meantime. However, they are competing against Microsoft, that has vowed to spend $20 billion on security. And if Microsoft is going to spend $20 billion, that's a tough competitor to compete against. And you can see how important security is going forward. So network now is still very important. I've heard people say that it's dead. It's absolutely not dead. It is still a very, very strategic part of your proposition. However, the decision is made on security and software partners first, with network second.
On that too, it's your cyber security. It's also the resiliency of your data long term, right? So when you look at the entire scope of of your solution. It has to include looking at everything from vulnerability, doing everything to secure all the way up to, and if there is an event, what are you doing to recover your data? What are you doing to make sure that the data you turn up isn't also encrypted or has the bad actors in there? So it's really about that holistic approach, and I think that's where the partnership side comes into play even more. There's over 3,000 vendors right now in the security space alone. There's a ton of noise, right? So having trusted partners that you can work with that understand where you're heading and how to pull the full solution together is more and more important, because there is a lot of unknown, and what ends up happening is people, because of the uncertainty, tend to do nothing until it's too late, right? So if you can get ahead of that and help them to understand where they're heading, and if it's not part of your core business, they're talking to somebody, right? So you should be partnering with people that can help you to expand that.
In these conversations you're having with the buyers, is security something that they're bringing to the table? Is it a deal breaker in terms of how expansive your security is, or if you have the right partner, what your technical professional services can do? What is the importance of security in these conversations? Opening it to the group.
I'll say from our side, I think it starts every conversation, right? I think when you look now, it is at the forefront of everyone's mind. Everything else we're doing then becomes part of the solution behind that. Right?
Yeah, I think having spent some time in service delivery also in my career, I think the way the buyers are thinking about it is it's part of the service assurance stack, right? And they expect carriers to live paranoid and ensure that not only is it available, but it's secure 100% of the time. So it's a service assurance element, in my opinion.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think it's becoming just part of the standard offer. It's assumed to be part of it, and of course there's security layers and security softwares that can be added on top, but in terms of the network security, it's expected. And so when you talk about also customer care, you need to be prepared to answer those questions and be available at all times of the day.
Yeah, I think the phenomenon is that enterprise brand is moving to software-defined and is moving to internet-first underlay, right? They really, expose the network, the data, the application, over the public internet. Now, the other piece when we talk customer is not only security. They want to make sure, to your point about application performance, but at the end of the day, the customers not only need a resilient network, high-performance network, they want to make sure that, your network can deliver the application performance, but also make sure that, everything is secure. So those are we see this, kind of going together now.
The biggest change I've noticed is when you were buying network, it was never politicized. It doesn't matter who you buy from, you bought network. Security, who you buy from can be politically motivated. And it is a very, very different topic when you are forced to buy through certain partners or vendors because of geopolitics and not because of the specific buying habits that you've had before.
I think we've seen the same in the market, right? It's just application-led. So security is part of that application, and your network provider, again, unfortunately, a pipe that we put some added value on top, and I think that security is becoming it's here to stay, and it's going to be front of mind. So I'm going to popcorn it out to the audience here. If anybody has a question.
So, hi, Maria Zedioui from Orange Business. Hi, Paul. So I just want to make a statement. Internet used to be indeed a hybrid add-on to MPLS, and now it's becoming the new standard network. So with the cloud, with the new cloud strategy, we need more powerful network with reliable speed and of course security. So internet is not MPLS. We know that we can't offer the same SLAs. So customers are asking for the same level of agreement than MPLS. They want the reliability, the speed, the security. And they ask more and more for KMZ file demarcation, so back to the transparency. So internet, we know it's a bunch of internet service provider. There are different hubs, different peers. So how can we solve that problem, and how can we answer the business demand on the transparency on internet? Give us KMC file, give us demarcation, who are the providers that are using, who is the last mile. So how can we remedy or, answer those questions?
I'm from Orange as well, so I can't answer that question. I feel like I should cover for someone else, right? It'd be naughty.
Panel.
Yeah. I think the transparency you hit, to me, that's the biggest thing, right? So from our perspective, it's looking at what that customer need is, right? Talking to them about what the differences are in the solution that they get. And I think that's a big part of it, right? Not all services are created equal, but because of some of the assumptions, like Cassandra said, around whether it's security or network, right? Same thing is people assume when they say, I'm going to get 100 meg or whatever it might be, that it's the same across the board. So I think it's up to us to really be able to educate and explain through that transparency as to what they're getting and why it might have different impact on their business, right? Because it's not just the dollar piece. It's really, to me, it's about what is the impact to your business and what are you willing to spend in some cases to get that.
Yeah, I think that it's that solution-led conversation again, right? It's just not like the traditional days where we're slinging circuits. You want five circuits from London to Paris at 10 gig. Here it is. But why do you want that? Do you need that, right?
Yeah, I think the key, obviously, the transparency with the customer is critical. But I also think the sales function is turned into a consultant function, right? And we need to make sure that not only are our sales teams empowered with the information, but are skilled in that manner, right? To be able to provide that type of transparency in a consultative manner versus just in a yes or no type manner.
Yeah, I think you're right. It's absolutely complicated when you move from private network to a public internet. So especially, we operate in China as well, so even much more complicated. We do a couple of things. One, how do we optimize domestically, for example, in China, right? So, how do you do more peering with, incumbent, with, internet exchange? The other thing, what we're actually doing is looking at application, right? Because when you look at enterprise customer, majority of the workload, they are in the cloud. They're using software service. And I can share with you, we look at our customer, the number one application they're using is Microsoft Office 365. So how do we figure out, to do better peering with not only, for example, Office 365, but Salesforce, SAP, Oracle. So, and that hopefully, deliver better application performance over internet to our customer.
I will say one thing from an Orange perspective, just to add to your words. What you're actually describing is MPLS. So often, it reverts back to, I want a private network. I want it exactly the same way as what I've had it before, but I want it cheaper. And when it's a commercial discussion rather than a security discussion, there's a slightly different dynamic to it, right? So I'm just, from a buyer's perspective, it's really hard to understand, do you actually want transparency, or is it cheaper for the internet? And I'm not sure that line's been, yeah, both, right?
And I think, by the way, I think the private network is still around. I mean, it's not going away. I mean, you have, customer, for whatever reason, they have to stay with private network.
They want the cheap and cheerful with the MPLS SLAs. So that's what we're facing nowadays with customers. They said, no, I want the same. I don't want SLOs, I want SLAs. So yes, you have dedicated internet access. You have your private internet, that you can run on MPLS. But more and more, they want the cheap with the SLAs. Again, I was mentioning why is it hard to get the KMZ files? When we ask providers, it's extremely hard. So if you can answer me on that.
I think
as far as the KMZ files, a lot of that's going to be just because the routes aren't static anymore, right? So when you looked at that, historically you built routes across a fiber path that was going to be the same every single time. Now it's get to the first pop, and then you're using networking to get you an optimized path over. So it's not going to necessarily be the same, but the statistics of the quality of your network, right, should be. And then it could be, what we're seeing is looking at a combination of different types of backbone services and last mile services to create the experience that the customer needs, right? Looking at what the applications are, looking at the different services that they're looking to drive across it. What do they want from a resiliency perspective? And then how do you build that to accomplish those needs?
Which I think opened the can of worms for our MPLS to SD-WAN migration, right? How has that been for all of you? What is the, it's been growing, some say in the 40% point, right? But then you have this conflict between, well, I want my MPLS, but I want it cheaper, and I don't really understand the migration. I don't really understand the technology. So what are some of the challenges?
Well, when you look at the migration from MPLS to software-defined, cost is actually not the biggest driver. The biggest driver is because application are in the cloud, right? And MPLS is not the good architecture to access cloud and access software SaaS services. Now, but on the other hand, there's an expectation that moving from MPLS to SD-WAN will save tons of money. It may not be the case. I think we'll see some cost saving, but it may not be a significant cost saving unless you really move to broadband.
I think on top of that, most of us are providers, right? There's also on our side, how do we maintain the revenue? And I mean, some of it's obvious, right? It's more bandwidth, lower price, but quantity has to outweigh the price drop. But on the other side, it's putting these types of solutions like SD-WAN wrapped around the solution in order to maintain the revenues. And I think that's one of the challenges we're facing. Of course, we want to provide the efficiencies and the values to the customers, but every year you're continuing to add and layer more things just for revenue maintenance. And I think that's the counter argument. How do you manage that in the future? I do think SD-WAN obviously provides a lot more visibility, control, applications, and security as well. But I do think, as we look at it, it's something we have to think about as providers.
Paul, I'm going to pick on you a little bit because I saw you made a contemplative face during that session. I don't know if you have a if not, it's fine. I'm not. Apologies for picking that up. But is there any other questions out in the audience that we can take? Wow. Okay, so we'll continue. And we talked a lot about application-led. And telcos we did some software engineering back then. I mean, like you have to program your network and all that. But applications becoming a big not only in your conversation, but also in your systems, right? Being able to do the SD-WAN and also integrate to the VMware and the Velo Cloud and all of these folks. How are you addressing the shift in capabilities needed internally to meet this challenge? From a talent perspective, from a knowledge perspective?
So I look at it from the perspective of by understanding the applications that are looking to run across the network, right? So we have to know where we are, where we're heading within that space. And I think you look at what your core networking is looking like. So ultimately, how do we tie our infrastructure together? And then what are we looking to pass across? So do you have the ability to take what the customer is using, get it to your point, and then be able to send it in the right direction? And there could be a number of different services that tie that together to make it accessible for the customer.
And then Jeff, you would say you guys take a partner's perspective, and if we can't do it, we're going to partner with someone who's going to be able to provide that. So we can't know everything, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So when we look at it, the application side is huge. To understand what their goals are coming out of that application, what is, and I think that's a big difference when we looked historically at business where it was up, down, how fast did you move between sites, things like that, right? Now it's down to, I need this application to have this response, I need this one to do something else, and this one I really don't care about. If it was down for a week, it wouldn't really matter, right?
Right,
And I think that's important to the business to understand themselves. So I think being able to ask those questions, drive into what's important to them, allows you to then make sure that you have the right solution on top. And we look at it as that layer that sits on top. The SD-WAN and the software side of it allows you to get into the application level, but you still have large amounts of data that you need to move between core sites, between cloud environments. I know there's hybrid. You know, when we sit down, first thing we talk about with customers is where are you on your technology journey, right? What does that look like today, and what does it look like in the future? How are we relevant throughout that, right? I want to be able to work with them now, but I also want to be relevant with them 2-3 years from now, where it could be completely different, right?
Yeah.
And help them on that journey.
All right.
And I think in terms of your question, you were talking about people and skills a little bit also, right? AT&T has an entity inside AT&T called AT&T University. So we always try to look out 3 to 5 years in the future and see where the technology's going and how we want to serve the kind of human capital aspect of what it's going to take to operate in that technology. So we've been under a massive reskilling kind of formula and training program for multi-year, but I can't say that we've done it all alone. We use somewhat of a hybrid approach where we obviously bring in key partners in this space, learn from them or outsource those activities, but have also reskilled a lot of our kind of legacy technology operations type roles.
Paul?
I mean, from an Orange perspective internally, it took us 25 years to get 356 telco suppliers globally. It's taken us 3 years to get 1,000 partners in applications and SaaS. As a headcount perspective alone, the skill set isn't there mainly because you just can't fill that kind of void so quickly, so fast. So we're always playing catch up. And then you've tried and got to hire the people from security and from OTTs back into what is a telco field. It's really, really difficult. So those skill sets, we have a university that have great things to do, right? We're trying to improve our skill sets, but it's very, very difficult to catch up, to get to the standard, and then try and overtake. At the moment, I don't think the telcos are there, but we're making our way up, right?
Yeah, so what I'm hearing though, you do all believe that there is a need to instill and to have some of that software capabilities now to compete against the hyperscalers, against all of the software companies who are you know, like the likes of Cloudflare coming down from up top, right? Software layer coming down to the managed services layer, and the likes of Cato and Ariaka going up into the software layer. Is that a consensus? Yeah. So consider we're less than 10 minutes away from the end. I wanted to go around the room and ask what you think, what the future of the buyer-seller dynamics would be like in the next 5 years. Ooh. Ooh.
Yeah.
Paul made a face.
yeah, was that look again? So what the future for a buyer is in the next?
Buyers and sellers dynamic.
The buyers and sellers dynamic. So as I said before, so telco will, it's not dead. It is a very, very key strategy. However, we have to automatize or digitalize as much as we can. At the moment, we did 200,000 quotes on telco in 2022. 80% of that was automated. That still leaves me with around 30,000 quotes that manually I have to do, or my team have to do. That is, as an overhead, that costs around €500,000. We cannot afford to do that on an ongoing basis. So from that dynamic, you have to automate, and then you can focus on the SaaS plays and the application plays, and because you consume them. You don't build them as much, you kind of consume them as partners. So that's where we stand. That dynamic will change.
Fully agree with what Paul said about that. I think collectively as an industry, we should do a better job to provide digital experience to our customer. How do we do API better among ourselves? Because there's tons of work today. We can simplify full technology, right? So that's one part. The other thing that when we talk to our customer, especially enterprise customer, the conversation just changed from network to application performance, we used to talk about network metric, latency, packet loss, and availability. But what does it mean to them, right? What they really care about is how do you provide the experience that required to do their work. And they also want to provide a lot, understand the level. They want you to understand a lot better in that cloud and SaaS ecosystem.
Agreed with 2 points. You just brought up a good point too. I do see on the network side there is a big push now for latency with all the content that people are consuming. It's not just capacity anymore, right? It's also speed. And I think how that's becoming much more important. That's part of the conversation. On the other hand, the automation, the digital, you mentioned APIs earlier. It is, how do we get to a common standard in the industry? Because I think it is something you have to be on the forefront of in order to stay competitive with the other carriers on the wholesale side, and we're experiencing that. I think also speed to quote, speed to delivery, speed to market with these new products. How do you manage all these partners? Obviously there's also a ton of options for customers, and I think we need to basically simplify those choices for the buyer, and I think that's the consultative approach that we talked about. So in our organization, we have an entire pre-sales team of engineers who need to be experts on all the partner solutions that we have as well as our own. And I think that's a big dynamic or a big differentiator in our space, in our region specifically. But then on top of that, how do you layer these automations in and create kind of that speed to get to the solution? I think that's a big one.
Yeah, and I use the term supplier versus alliance in terms of who I'm buying from on behalf of AT&T. Part of it is around the standardization. There's an amazing amount of overhead in this industry. Back to the volume of quotes, we have that volume of ticketing and email exchanges in terms of events on MTTR. I mean, every interaction with billing operations, we really have to create an ecosystem where standardization and adoption drives that overhead out of our industry, and we will compete at a much better spot. And then again, I think we also need to be more transparent with each other in the industry in terms of where we're going, because we all are looking for return on this very capital intense business. So in some of these supplier-buyer relationships at the large wholesale level, we need to make sure that transparency drives a higher confidence in that return on investment, and in return we get some rate stability and we can compete in the marketplace.
Yeah, and I would say, everything there as far as being able to automate, obviously that's going to be huge where you go across. The partnerships, right? Like you said, those are massive. And also being open with what we're really good at, right? Understand your own business and what you're really good at, because if you have someone who's invested to build out a market and build out an area, it's better for you to work together to put services that are on top of that with your expertise, right? So we want to understand, I want to know what I'm really good at, so my team understands that. And if it's not within our skill set, that's where we want to be able to partner. And the whole idea of being better together, right, creates a better experience for our customers.
All right, so what I heard, automation, standardization, and transparency are the three pillars that we're going to go forward with into the next 5 years for buyers and seller dynamics. Thank you so much, panelists, for your time to come here and speak to us. And thank you, audience, for hanging out with us today. All right. Have a good ITW.
Thank you. That was a really great session. Keeping with